Welcome back to Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia. And this is your host, Chad Everett Brochures. And this is Chat with Chad. And we've got Jim as the guest again. So, Jim, if you'd like to do a quick little intro.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Thanks again for having me, Chad. Marine Corps veteran, father of two, Detroit resident. So I live in the great Midwest.
Nice. Detroit. Whew. It's a
Yep.
fun area to live in nowadays, right?
It's a little steamy this week.
Yeah. Oh, well, since it's the 4th of July, I really wanted to get a little bit more because it's like obviously being the birthday of the nation, the day we declared independence from Britain. What I'd really like to kind of go over with you today is just getting to know a little bit more, since you did serve, more of the experience, overall, kind of like who you were before serving, through and then after, and kind of like some of those transitions and, some of the experiences that you had. Because to me, there's going to be so much value in that life. So with that, Jim, I really take it away, brother. I'll ask questions along the way to kind of get to know more, but it's your show today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, here I am, a young knucklehead. I didn't do anything. I played football in high school and didn't have the best of grades. After graduating high school, I said, my father, my grandfather before him, my uncles, they were all military. And I realized that I needed to do something to better myself, whether that was further education or military or trade school or something along those lines. I opted for the Marine Corps, and I don't regret it at all. That was how I ended up. That was how I ended up in the Marine Corps.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
That's definitely a great way of creating structure,
Yep.
and giving opportunity. Because the military does try to do what they can to, give back to the service people, so that we can obviously honor you for your time.
Absolutely.
So prior to getting into the military, it was kind of like just a regular upbringing overall. It's kind of like kids trying to find their way and that kind of thing.
Yep.
So when did you enlist?
I had enlisted in '94. I was in from 95 till 99. It was, for me, I was very fortunate. I'd taken my entry exam and scored well enough. I could have chosen any job I wanted. And I ended up being what's called open contract because of my timing. I couldn't get into the school that I wanted, so I ended up, it was up to the military, up to the Marine Corps where they put me. Obviously, there's always the concern of being, hey, your job is going to be foxhole mover for the next 4 years, right? Or in-flight missile repairman or some junk. But I was very fortunate. I landed in the communication electronics school, and that is obviously something that I did ground radio repair. But the beautiful part about that, and why I was so fortunate, is that was something that would translate from military to civilian. I could take that experience with me and actually start a career with it.
What I think is really interesting about that too is it's because people typically go in at such a young age, they kind of go after the jobs that may seem more fun or seem less dangerous, right? The thing that'll keep them out of like fighting, right?
Excuse me.
It's a very similar thing to like kind of how colleges are set up. Like they offer courses that don't really have a lot of applicability into life. Now, I'm not saying all of them, right? Like some of them,
Right.
Absolutely. Some of them are fundamental in building towards the next thing that actually does have something that's functional in society. And then you have like what you did, which is you went into the military and you took a direction that gave you something that was translatable. So transferable skills are really beneficial. And with technology, what a fantastic direction you took. This technology is not going to get old at any point in time. It's going to continue to grow for us. It itself gets old for the year that it's published or produced, but it builds to the next thing. And that career path you took gave you a lot of life skills and a lot of applicable job opportunities. Now, good for you to make that choice.
Well, like I said, I was fortunate because I fell into it. And going back to what you'd said about you choose jobs that are fun, right? I actually remember having the conversation with my recruiter when he looked at me and he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I told him, I said, "Well, I want to be the guy that hangs out of the side of the helicopter with the big machine gun." I don't know how much that would have been transferable, but that was the job I had asked for originally. And I ended up shying away from that when he told me that I don't get to do that. I don't get to hang out of the side of the helicopter until I've been in for 8 to 10 years. That's a little more of a senior position.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, gratefully that and rightfully they put it off at such a time frame, so they don't just get some Yahoo out there that just wants to start shooting camels,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
wherever you're deployed. Yeah, what a fascinating thing too. But it's got my mind kind of going into the whole, some of the plight of military. Like there's
Yeah.
people that they like the rear tank gunner. You know,
Hmm.
like how is that going to be a transferable skill into society? And why contract work for like protection or mercenary type contract work post military service, it seems to be like a pigeonholed position or opportunity for them. Yeah, it's kind of like this is it. You really don't have a whole lot more utility in society, which you could go into law enforcement or you can go into other things like that. But I think those contract jobs like that pay more, so they're going to draw people into them.
Well, just the military itself, regardless if you're, the chief bottle washer, just the fact that, I mean, let's be honest, just the fact that in the military, you've got the discipline, you've got the structure, you've got the regimented understanding, and you see the value of it.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that I really took out of the military that you don't see it anywhere else was the value of solid leadership.
Mm.
Very structured, very regimented. Nobody had any questions about what their roles were. And in poor leadership, you don't have that. People are kind of random and meandering throughout their day, and
Jumping
that's
hierarchy and
yes,
yeah.
exactly. And so inherently, regardless of what your role is, even if you're, the boot polisher, you have that experience that
Mm.
you can draw from. Um, you look around and today there's a lot of especially in the youth, and it's probably my folks and my grandparents were probably saying the same things about the generations, following them, but you don't have the discipline. You don't have you go out and you get into the workforce and you don't have the ability to get out of bed and get to work on time.
Yeah.
These are things that, regardless of what your role is in the military, as transferable skill, your next employer is going to know you have that quality.
Yeah. I think actually that's an excellent point to point out or to bring up is most people will look at the macro concept. What was the job title? What was the
Right.
job responsibilities as an overview, but not really the skeletal structural underpinning that actually gives a significant value. Me being that I've had more than 80 employees at one time, majority of which were millennials. Um, you have to adapt to create structure in order to facilitate the job needs and stop, like I mentioned, that the hierarchical overleap or the leapfrog over, you're my manager, but I didn't get the answer I wanted out of you. So now I'm going to play it like mom and dad. I'm going to go to dad to get the better answer or mom to get the better answer. And that's where you get a lot of that lacking structure. As I mentioned before, also, it's kind of where like the military offers, and what we talked about before the video, um, the military offers a lot of structure, a lot of strategy and um, organization,
Hmm.
which puts more of the conscientiousness of thinking, which is more of the conservative thinking, which it creates enough organization to make life move in a way that has predictable outcome. And then on the other side, as a lot of people are like, well, you're not open-minded enough. There is a point in time whenever people are too open-minded, and it works a lot like a parachute. Without the strings of resistance, with the weight of the person, a parachute is nothing but a big sheet flowing in the wind, is it's too open. It doesn't
Right.
have enough borders, definitions or barriers to create restrictions enough that it actually gives you uh,
Function.
exactly. So if you're too
That's a
open-minded,
great analogy.
it's yeah, it's unfortunately it's not mine though.
It's
But
beautiful.
yeah, but it really does work because what do we hear often in our conversations or even in the overall conversations that we have as far as like the predominant ones that take over in the country is that you're not open-minded enough. You're not open-minded enough. Well, that is a left thinking method or process of thinking. You
Hmm.
find that more on the, and whenever I talk about left and right, I mean more in the psychology of thinking than I mean the political scale. But it is interesting that on the political spectrum, they fall in those categories. You know, so left is going to be more open-minded, right's going to be more conservative in thinking, which, as I mentioned before as well, conservative in thinking is more conscientious in thinking. Which a lot of people are like, well, I'm conscientious about myself and I'm an open-minded person. They actually are on a spectrum of one another. So it doesn't mean that if you're open-minded that you don't think about yourself enough that you understand you affect others. But if you think about the plight of others more than yourself, you could be the person in the soup line giving out soup, but never eating yourself. It's only a matter of time before now you become a dependent.
Right.
Now you lose your autonomy because you're too altruistic. So anyway, so as far as that goes, and like I mentioned, I really don't want to hijack too much, but just to add a little bit of thinking
No,
into it.
yeah, it's great insight. I love it.
And the piece that I really find that's valuable about what you said too is that it's more of the real deep underpinning. You know, it's like you were taught, you know, there's a reason why they teach you make your bed a certain way, polish your boots. You know, the reason why they put you through that conditioning is they also need to have a dependability of outcome. And the best way to predict the predictability of outcome is to get everybody doing something in the very same structure. So, and having that as that base level. So, the other thing that I'll
Well,
point out, I'm,
you know, when I was in, I didn't realize how much, um, you know, because just like everybody, you know, you rolling out of bed is still hard. You know, even though you have to do it, and there's more severe penalties if you don't. Um, but when you're going through it, I didn't realize how much of a differentiating factor that was between, you know, having military experience and uh, having a college degree. But it truly is a real big differentiating factor. A lot of the people, you know, I mean, you and I are both in leadership positions professionally, um, and it's mind blowing how that those small minor details are enough to trip people up, and they allow them to do it over and over and over again. Where if you have somebody like I said, even if they were, you know, the lug nut polisher, um, they got that part down. You know what I mean? If they're veterans.
yeah.
So and don't get me wrong, I understand that there's some knuckleheaded veterans as well. I get all that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that you know if you weren't in the military, you are a knucklehead by no means. I'm just saying that these are simple things and differentiating factors when evaluating candidates for a position in a professional setting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's you look for the deeper character values because again, a
Yes.
lot of it is you just want something predictable because
Hmm.
predictability can create stability. You know, and
Hmm.
often is a major factor for stability. What comes to mind also is McDonald's. Now, a lot of people that watch this have actually watched the more recent McDonald's or the movie that was made about McDonald's that had
Hmm. Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton. Yes, and that was such a great movie. But
Yeah.
what he did is, and they showed it, but they didn't overly highlight it. And that was how they took like the other restaurant models where somebody at the restaurant would be responsible for cooking, serving, and or you know like there's cleaning up and all of that, and they would create such a requirement for the company to look at them as a higher level asset
Hmm.
because they could do all of these things, but if they lacked in one area but they were good in other areas, it could affect the company's reputation overall. But what McDonald's did is they compartmentalized the entire job in a way that you're the fry cook. That's all that I want you to do. Or you're the fry cook and you do the bun prep. Whatever, they minimized the job requirements because they made it easier to exchange the employees. If an employee became disgruntled or didn't show up or whatever, it was less on the the training time, and it was far more productive because now they had everybody working together as a unit versus I do 5 different jobs. And I'm not saying the people at McDonald's currently don't do 5 different jobs, but that was one of the things that really gave McDonald's such a huge step forward now versus what it was prior, which is more like a regular restaurant, not a fast food concept, is they're pretty much the father of fast food.
Right.
Um, so as far as that goes, that's kind of what stands out for me is like in the military, they teach you and you get to that point and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. They teach you the job, but they teach you to be a professional, a specialist at the job. Like you've said, like mid-flight missile repairman, right?
Right.
I know that's more of a hyperbolic and humorous type of
Yes.
sense of your job, but it's like underwater basket weaving, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
but it does teach you to be an expert at that. And then if you graduate into another job, you take those skills into the next position. And then you know how to become an expert at that because you were trained and conditioned to become an expert at the other thing, the previous job, which is very detail oriented for function.
And there's a lot of cross training as well. There is no weakest link. And the beautiful thing about it is if you have the weakest link, you can always interchange with a stronger link in that chain. So if something's happening and you can see somebody being overwhelmed, you can either assign other people to assist or just replace them and put them in a place where it's not as detrimental. The deficiency is not as detrimental because there's so much cross training. As a radio repairman, I specialized in 3 different radios, all based on the RT 1209, which was their nomenclature for the radio that I worked on, the receiver transmitter. But I could also work in, other areas, work on other radios that had different receivers, transmitters. We had the radar technicians in our shop with us, and that was a completely different school. But obviously, based on where the 2 different pieces of equipment crossed in troubleshooting and repair, it was very easy. I could have stepped in there and helped them, with radar repair as well. So there was an awful lot of the ability to be interchangeable, and that not only is great for the individual, but it really it almost makes the whole thing to where it can't break down, and that's effectively what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and which is what organization would not want that there?
Right, exactly. It goes right in line with your McDonald's analogy, though.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the reasons why we're dealing with the things that we're dealing with is it seems like every time government gets involved in something, not the military government side, I'm talking about the legislated side,
Sure.
where they're trying to create fairness or some sort of equality. And by putting certain rules or restrictions on companies, it reduces the structure while it's trying to improve on something. So, and I'm not saying that those policies are bad, but everything has a cost. It's not all raw benefit. There will never be a raw benefit without cost. So it's just what the cost is. If I were to give you $1 million, you would have a cost effect of not having to work to produce the $1 million. But now you have the ability to spend $1 million, which you're going to do with your time, right? However you choose to use it. If you go the smart route, you probably invest it. If you go the I am immature with money or finance route, you probably spend it all within a year, or however long it takes you to spend it. You just spend like crazy because you feel like $1 million is more than, $26,000 a year like income. So you're like, I have unlimited funds. And then the rationale to spending isn't the same as if you made, over 100 million or 100,000 a year, because you look at it with more of that's only 10 years of my salary, versus 20, which then you're looking at, multiply many more years. So everything has a cost benefit value. So getting involved in trying to put some of these policies in, again, being good policies, the follow-up is tinker, walk away, much like with what we experienced in the 90s, whenever HRS became a really big challenge, where they stepped in and said, no longer can you spank your kids. And if you spank your kids and we find that it's abuse, then were going to press charges, and they came in pretty heavy-handed and changed the power dynamic within children to parents. The parents got overwhelmed, did not want to at that point because of working multiple jobs and dealing with everything else they had, to learn another parenting style that was different than the advice they could get from their parents or the advice they could draw up from their own personal experiences in life. And then they're left with, I don't know what to do. So they spared the rod and spoiled the child, if you will, which
Right.
created another breakdown of that hierarchical process that helped mature people. So that was just the known process. Now, this is one of those writing elements, which is now we get to see some of the results of that, lacking the discipline, lacking the structure. Oh, and that's something that I've always heard about the military is discipline and structure.
Absolutely. I like to tell people that I have a 4-year degree in leadership with a major in hard work and discipline.
That is a beautiful statement.
From USMC.
Yes. And of all of the services too, I know that it's like there's this inner, like, who's better, like conversations that are just the rivalry conversations, and it is a
Yeah.
lot like team sports.
Yes. Yeah. We bust each other's chops. It's very much a brotherly love kind of thing. Um, being a veteran is a classification of its own. And then you can categorize it from there. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'm an Army veteran. But a veteran's a veteran, and there's a brotherhood there. And I apologize. I'm not trying to leave the Air Force out, but they,
Yes.
they are often the I don't know. That's just the little brother, I guess. Um,
That's it. That is how everybody seems to talk about him too, by the way.
well, and it'll
Little
change. It'll
brotherhood.
change. I believe that this new Space Force is going to be likely a kind of a division of the Air Force. So I'm curious how that's all going to play out. But the Air Force hasn't even. A lot of people don't realize the Air Force has only just recently, had its. I think 60 or they just turned 70 years old. It's not even that old.
Mm.
Before that, it was the Army Air Corps. It was a division of the Army. So the Air Force, they're still proving themselves. Let's just put it that way. They're earning their stripes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all of them are valuable. Absolutely all of them
Absolutely.
are valuable. And it's the overarching value goes much deeper than the superficial appreciation.
Hmm.
No, it's the benefit of talking to a veteran on the day that we declared independence is you're an arm, or you're one of the direct individuals that helped maintain this, what the freedom that we identify now. So it's a fascinating thing. No,
It,
to
it it really is. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I was just talking with somebody a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the the value and the benefit. And I was talking because of everything that's going on with right now with the protests and stuff along those lines. Um, I was referring back to the Civil War, and
Mm.
the Civil War, that was a war that went on for years and years and years. And you look at the fighting style back then, where you all just kind of lined up in rows and marched at each other with guns. It's really silly. But the part that was interesting to me, that really caught my attention, that I never considered before, is how did they continue to recruit? Because they had massive casualties. 20,000 casualties on one battle, 25,000 casualties at one fight. How did they continue to keep those ranks full and continue to recruit men to do this when this is going on for years and years, and there's no end in sight?
Mhm.
And the truth is that there was a professor that had commented that it was mind blowing. I loved it. What she was saying was that it was, at the time, America was an experiment.
Mhm.
At the time of the Civil War, we had just crested, not even 100 years old at the time of the Civil War, and the men that volunteered to fight on both sides said, you know what, this experiment, this country that we've taken as our own, that we've stuck our flag in the ground and said, this is ours. It was worth it to them to sign up, to possibly give their life, to leave their families, leave their livelihoods, leave their farms. And it was worth it to them to fight for that. That to me, that really pulled at my heart.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, it's, you may not have signed up for that reason, but you live that way.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we do forget, and or we've never been informed. That's an
Mm-hmm.
excellent piece of insight too. Is it's people don't put that into the scope of understanding. That we were less than 100 years old by the time the Civil War began.
Yeah.
And it was opposing ideologies. There was more to it. It wasn't, slavery wasn't the only thing. It just was a major issue.
Right.
But at least then we had more clarity about the challenges, the issues. More modern day is, in a term that I borrowed from politics, is filibustering, where
Mm-hmm.
you put a bunch more things into a bill that are not standing for the bill. They're just trying to get it through and get it approved so they can join multiple different things
Right.
into a bill. And that's more of what's going on now. It's like people that are detail oriented are going to push back whenever they see data that does not line up with the current situation. So that's why, and I promise not to go far into some of the more modern challenges that we're dealing with, but
Right.
they say, your silence is violence, and we see you, blah, blah, blah. Right. There's some of us that say, well, I just don't want to affiliate with the totality or the total value of what's going on, because there's things about it, not as a whole, but in part, that I don't agree with. So there's going to be those people that don't want to stand in that space.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself in that same place because I'm looking for the filibuster stuff that's going into it. It's like, there's people that are trying to infiltrate or have already infiltrated, this newer protest movements that are their agendas are not for what they're stating it is, but it's actually to overthrow something else, like trying to put communism in place of capitalism and that kind of thing. It's like they're
Yes.
conjoined with it and creating more hostility and upset and damage. And they're using somebody else, they're plagiarizing somebody else's emotional state, making them into foot soldiers so that they can get their agenda in. So it's filibustering. Now, it's just that when you're emotionally excited like that, it's hard to think rationally in the way that, like, yeah, you got a point that we do need to see some things change here. But at the same time, it's who else is riding your back that's actually pushing their agenda while you're pushing your way through the lines. Who's going to get that software in that changes the system in a way that now we all lose, not just we make a reform in an area.
Well, one of the things we wanted to talk about was how in my perspective, how the military changed me, what my
Yeah.
experience was like. I mentioned just being a young knucklehead going in. When I was in, I never thought that this would happen, but silly things, but patriotic, but things like Lee Greenwood, right? that would pull at you. You would feel that, Um, so it did, I feel, make me more patriotic. It gave me an appreciation for what goes into preserving liberty.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me an appreciation now that I'm older and looking back to be able to say, well, how did we get to the point, where I kind of stepped in, right? And so
Do you mind
looking,
if we grab that for a second?
no,
And
go ahead.
the point where you stepped in,
Yeah.
do you mean like where you left the youth of yourself and the adult stepped into that place? Or do you mean where you stood in and you stepped into the system of being patriotic, or both, or something else?
I was actually referring to the latter, hey, listen, there were guys before me and there have been guys after me, but there was a point where I was one of those. You want me on that wall, right?
Yeah.
I was on that wall, so that was where I was referring to, where I stepped in. But looking at what you were just talking about with the way the people are so sensitive, overly sensitive. It's almost, not almost, in my opinion, it can be described as an utter lack of appreciation for what went into creating the world that we live in.
Mm.
You know, there's some patriots with regards to the founding fathers and the quotes that they've made, and there's no way you can read those even today and not look at it and say that still makes a lot of sense. Um, so I really feel that there's if we can look at things and recognize that, hey, this has not always been what we've always had. We actually had to fight and fight hard to get it. So please don't just whimsically throw it away over a hurt feeling, or make these radical changes to things because we had to fight to get away from those ideals that you're trying to push on us now. And it's only because you don't understand where we've come from, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I would say I agree with that completely, that they don't understand where they've come from. But when somebody hears that and they think, well, you don't understand.
It's
And
fair.
right, but the reason why is even if you learn something that's inaccurate, the process or the act of learning something has a labor value to it.
Hmm.
And it over time of years of dedication of learning that thing. Now it feels like because it's only valuable if you've worked hard for it, there's a sensation that I worked hard for this knowledge and this knowledge needs to be right because I dedicated the amount of time to my life or of my life to this. So therefore, I need to defend it versus it's an idea that I could let go easily. You know, it is fair that we could always like we want to be able to have the table of discussion always available. But
Yes.
we also don't want the table of discussion to be in such a way that there's less discussion and more dictating, because that's what the safe spaces and the echo chambers create. You know, Jim sits at the table with 5 other people that have opposing ideologies to Jim, but unifying ideologies to themselves. Jim may not feel safe enough to even say something, but when he does, everybody feels like they've been personally assaulted. Therefore, they're like, you are no longer allowed at this table. Now, we're going to continue to discuss this. There's 4 other bodies at this table. Therefore, the table of discussion is still available. It's just Jim's not allowed at it anymore because his ideas are crazy or they're opposing ours. And that's what echo chambers can create and safe spaces can create. We want to be able to have those conversations, but have it so that we can deeply look into where other people stand. You know, so having conversations like we're having, you know, there's going to be things in our lives we may disagree with. And I appreciate that we can disagree with those things and still remain, you know, friendly and have good discourse with each other. On this topic, we don't oppose at
Right.
all. I'm
We're
completely,
an echo chamber.
no, not at all. But you could say that because we agree completely, but
Right.
I also have enough of a constitution in myself, and therefore I've also recognized that in you. If you would disagree with me, you'll share it. Like as
Right.
we were discussing offline about Congress people and or state representatives,
Hmm.
predominantly being lawyers now, and that's something to look at, and that may be a problem. And your reaction out of that was that it's not necessarily a problem, and because of the benefits of knowing law and knowing how people work and knowing how the legislation and legal systems work
Hmm.
versus like a doctor or a different type of specialist. So
Hmm.
um, it's not that we really disagreed, but you knew that from my statement, it could occur that that might be a conflicting position, but
Yes.
you didn't feel fear to share it. You're just
Right.
like, well, I disagree. And then like, okay. And I wanted to hear you out. And then I'm like, oh no, I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. Yep.
But it was like, there was that moment where we had to understand whether or not we were going to agree or disagree. But
Well,
we
we
presented it because we're not trying to have an echo chamber with each other.
right. No, I agree with you 100%. And we touched on it a little bit last week too when we talked about, um, you know, how do you when you have a depth of knowledge on a topic, that doesn't tell you what everybody else's depth of knowledge on a topic is. You only know your own.
Mhm.
So there's almost a shell game going on of who knows more until you figure out where each other's knowledge level or understanding level is. So that's where the conversation comes in, and it's almost as a matter of um, maybe not necessarily a senior to a junior or a master to a slave or however you want to look at it, one's higher than the other. It's more a matter of, okay, well, have you considered this? Yes, I have considered this, and this is why that doesn't make sense. That demonstrates each other's level of understanding. So you have to get to that point. And the problem with today is any opposition, it shuts the conversation down. There is no trying to figure out, well, whose understanding is better, because like you said, somebody can look to me and say, well, you don't understand. Hey, that's fair. There's a possibility that somebody's considered something I haven't. I'm more than willing and open to talk about that. In fact, I welcome it and I want to, because that's going to, if nothing else, further my understanding um, of their position.
Yeah. You know, I find that people that think like you do are more geared to adaptability, because you're not trying to trump somebody by being a better expert. You're trying to be contributory to the conversation. You're trying to create more detail to the subject. You know, it's like, what I find that's really fascinating is that when people get a specific degree of expertise, or they become a specialist,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost as if people look at them as they're at the very top of that knowledge base, and there's nothing else you could learn from what that person already knows. They, not from what they know, but they've learned everything there is about that subject. And the world of knowledge doesn't work that way. It
Right.
works like multiple ladders going in different directions, and not all of them go up. You know, there are angles, there's directly, like, you know, vertical values, there's all, or horizontal to vertical. There's so many different ways you could look at the body of knowledge. But what I find is that people want to worship something, and they're moving towards worshiping something overall. So they're working towards, okay, well, if what you know right now, like, so what you and I look for is the best utility of knowledge at the moment, but open to that utility of knowledge adapting or growing, or becoming a hybrid into another place. And, or even it's in itself, as time goes on and situations require that you adapt to the next level, you develop a new level of understanding. Whether you've taken an alleyway that actually leads to a dead end and you need to go back and start learning another direction, we're not so married to it that we found an alleyway and then we want to just wreck right through it regardless of the buildings falling around us. So, which is to tear it all down and start a new mentality, which is,
Mm-hmm.
we went this far, it's not going to go any further, destroy it all, we'll build something else afterwards, no matter the casualties, because they're working on the greater good, right? We're
Right.
more of, I'm going to back out of the alley. I understand where I've been, but I need a different utility to the situation.
Yes.
So, and that's the way that, for me, that's how knowledge works. Knowledge is a growing, living creature.
Absolutely.
And you have to treat it as such. Otherwise, you try to tame it in a way that it serves you and only you, versus allowing it to serve you in a way that you can actually let it live, which
Mm-hmm.
is this whole idea about the specialists now having multiple different types of specialists. We're all looking for, like, our mascot. We're all looking for the team that we're going to root for, you know, but really we're looking for the star in the team. Right. So, like the Ben Shapiro's, right? It's like, that's my boy. And then for the people that want dogma of it, is the people that don't want anything else to either conflict with, create contrast values, and let knowledge develop naturally as it would, as knowledge confronts something that disagrees with it, or they want something that just beats it, like the debate mentality. It needs to beat and win.
Well,
So,
is that a matter of priority? I mean, I could say that adaptability is a military veteran trait. Um, you know, you look at the Marine Corps, and it's adapt and overcome. That's what we do. Um, but you talk about the recognition of the value of knowledge and the importance of knowledge, and how it stands alone as its own entity, as its own living, breathing thing, because it's never done growing, it's never done evolving. Um, so in a situation where you've got somebody that's not as adaptable, would you say that they would prioritize their value over the value of their knowledge, recognizing that they are the ones that are going to move on, and they're the ones, and that knowledge is stagnant?
yeah, that's the taming of it. They want to make it something that fits them versus letting what it is they have to fit it. No,
Yeah.
so it's like, as it is, it's like, it's when you create knowledge, like you tame knowledge in a way, like all it is like where you make knowledge bend to your will, which is where you tell other people cognitive bias, right? Like, I'm right, and here's why I'm right. They're weaponizing the information to support their position without allowing that position to develop. It's like whenever somebody else is like, well, you're wrong, you're like, no, I'm not. Proof that I'm wrong. And then as soon as they do, they're acting, more like a child with their arms crossed going, nope, I'm
Right.
not accepting that. Nope. It's,
Yeah.
you have to let it breathe. So that's why, like, I constantly ask myself, like, I have a daily meditative practice. That is, I ask myself on a daily basis, especially when I feel like I really know something, is it true? Now, is what I believe true? And where can I find that it's wrong? And I keep trying to figure out where I'm wrong with what I know, because I want to be wrong so I can continue to grow.
Right.
So, but I'm not so open to being wrong that I'll never be right, because that could be dangerous too, right? That's too open. That's the sheet in a parachute concept, right? It's,
Right.
well, then it's like as I mentioned also before, the yes, no values. Now that was
Yeah.
offline, but,
Yeah.
I think it's appropriate for now, right? And as I mentioned to you before, and I'll just talk about it almost like we didn't talk about it before. And that
Yeah. No,
is,
that's fine.
your no, or your yes value is only as valuable as your no. So if you can't say no to somebody, your yes is as valuable as your no, because over time you'll take on so many commitments you don't either plan to accommodate, or you won't be able to accommodate. So if you can't say no to me about something, I'm probably going to get a weak yes. If you have a weak no, weak yes. So you can live your life in a way that you can't say no to people, which that means also you can't really say yes and earnestly intend on completing it, or have the capacity to honor the request.
Well, it's equivalent to holding people accountable, setting an example and holding people accountable. You can only hold them accountable to the extent of the example that you've set.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. Otherwise, you come across like a hypocrite,
Exactly.
and hypocrites don't really bode very well when they're caught.
It's not a leadership quality.
No, it's not. It is one of those things for people to understand. Like, part of what I do is I audit businesses.
Hmm.
It's a pastime a thing that I enjoy. It's not just a professional thing. Like, I like to know the state of businesses and the structures so that I can continue to adapt my own in a way that helps progress the thing forward and makes it more likely to survive. But it's safe enough that I'm not trying to take on every new little thing that I see that has an early on benefit, but a long-term consequence, because that's the utility of information now, but not giving the permission for that information to be a detriment later, which people, they want to try to, I learned it, I've spent this time learning it, I don't need to adapt it any further, so therefore I've locked it in, kind of like I got my degree, I don't need to learn anything else.
I've got that part done. Yes.
Yeah, I don't need to revisit it. But the reality is that knowledge will outpace you if you don't watch it. Like, if you
Hmm.
don't let it live, because it's going to do it anyways. As other people are going to get an advantage on you that are willing to be adaptive. So if you want to close your mind, then by all means. But your mind being closed is going to limit your abilities to survive in the future, and that's what a lot of people are doing when they take on dogmatic beliefs. you
Hmm.
know it's going to have to be this way, and you need to have a population of people that agree with you, otherwise you get left behind. And you need them to help support you with the resources to survive. So that's why I say I like to assess businesses, because I want to know what the competition's doing, and I want to also know what my peers are doing, so that I can continue to develop this thing in the future that's going to survive and be effective and thrive. So, tangent, I know,
Yeah,
but
we need those litmus tests to be able to not only evolve and adapt, but also to find out where we stand, so we know where our deficiencies are, so we know where our strengths are. And obviously, if you're talking about evolving and adapting, knowing your strengths and weaknesses has a lot of value.
Yes, it does.
So
Absolutely. Otherwise, just you'll start like getting these odd growths on you. You
right.
know, like it
It's
has
not
no
a Uma.
utility. I just got caught up on the news and I just can't get rid of it. You know,
Right.
or it's just a subject that I have no real value in right now, and I don't plan on putting a bridge of value to it. Um, so yeah, so the no to yes value is obviously highly beneficial. You don't want to have such a strong no value that you never take something on, because you have to be willing to experience new things, but not too willing to the point that you're not stable, because then you come across as being unpredictable, which means that people are less likely to want to have you be a part of what they're doing. And if they do, question their motives.
Right.
You never know what they're trying to use you for. Like
Absolutely.
getting promoted, like Enron, we need a new president before, we need a new CEO before we actually take this thing.
Before we
He's a
light this
fall guy.
fuse. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Fun with Dick and Jane, right? That movie was,
Right.
yeah, that was the whole.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring us back, you'd mentioned before we started the call, you had several or multiple fun facts to bring
Oh
up,
yeah.
some things to bring up about your experience. And also I want to know, I want the audience to know this. This is the free range portion of the conversation, which, the free range is, it's going to grow organically because we have two minds that are eager to learn and to exchange things with each other. So forgive us for our tangents, but yet, take value from where we went.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So now to the fun facts. Jim's fun fact of the day.
So when we talked about this being the 4th of July and everything, I looked up some fun facts about the 4th of July. The 4th of July, obviously, the day that we signed the Declaration of Independence, right? This is a bunch of veteran elder statesmen, right, that put this together, came up with this solution to distance ourselves from the governing body of Britain. The average age of the signers of the Declaration of Independence is only 45 years old.
Oh shit.
Isn't that fascinating? I mean,
Dropping
what
F-bombs over
what the
there.
hell am I doing?
Yeah. Well, but to add to something to that though, with our comforts, so we've been able to enjoy the years more for every year that's gone by versus our forefathers. Our
Sure.
forefathers had to spend more time worried about survival than we do. So that lets us find more entertainment value, because you don't do a whole lot of entertainment when you're trying to survive.
Right.
So at 45 may realistically, on a maturity scale for us, be probably closer to 65, 70. Just because of the maturity elements that come with a daily requirement of surviving. They couldn't check into Netflix and sit back and binge. Could you imagine Hancock doing that one?
Right. Well, I guess that shows that there's inflation on maturity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A good way of putting it, though. But that's a privilege that we've earned over time. It's a privilege that our ancestors gave us.
Yes, we haven't earned it. It was given to us. I
It was
agree with
given to
that.
us. Yes.
Yeah.
But they earned it for us.
But we have to earn the same thing for the following generations.
We owe it to them.
Yes.
If we move our median survival age to 100, it's like, will you live more in 30 years versus 100? There's ways of factoring that in, but it also depends on what you want to experience. You can live 100 years and done nothing meaningful other than you got to be a centurion, not the Roman centurion, but the age value centurion, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of things about that. So at 45, I wouldn't say diminish your value, but try to make every day meaningful in a way that you feel like you're doing something to contribute. They actually were in a position they had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they wanted to realize the country be what they wanted it to be, they had to take action. And that was an act of courage that most of us won't see in our life.
Absolutely.
They had to stand up and sign something that represented that their people were going to die, but they were literally going to die for their freedom, because they wanted to be out from under the boot heel of colonialism
Hmm.
of Great Britain. Now,
Right.
at that time, they were very addicted to the model of behavior of colonialism. It doesn't mean they didn't create good, because they also, with that colonialism, their particular brand also created democracy, because it was an easy adaptation after their colonialism was over. So India has more of a democracy versus what it had prior, if from my understanding, but I could be proven wrong on this. Hong Kong is from British rule, and they
Well,
have
yeah.
democracy because of that.
Not
Hong
anymore.
Kong stands out of China. It is actually considered to be its own entity, but China says we're going to take it.
They just did. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
neat.
And but now it's like, because the world is worried about COVID-19 more so than they're worried about Chinese politics,
Right.
and they don't realize what Hong Kong stands for. But that is also because it was a, we can say it's a privilege of colonialism from Britain because of the British rule there.
Right.
But once they gave it back, just like Gandhi wanted Britain out of India, there was something that came out of it. It's like, to know something, it's hard to unknow something. So if you know that you have another capacity or ability, it's hard to forget that you have a capacity or ability that the other system doesn't allow for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I
Um,
this is our fun fact, right? It's Jim's fun facts,
yeah.
and I'm like hijacking it with
No, no, not at
kind
all.
of like exploring more of these thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Along those same lines of the average age of the signer being 45, Thomas Jefferson, who was the author at the time he wrote it, only 33. That's a lot of research. That's a lot of dedication that went into that from a 33-year-old.
Mhm.
I couldn't imagine that level of responsibility. I'm in my 40s. Definitely not in my early 30s. But 33 years old. MLK was 33.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, these are great men, patriots. That you find purpose in servitude, right?
Mhm.
And that's the only way I can look at this. That would be the only driving force I could consider. That would, maybe not the only, but that would be one major driving force that I could consider. Having somebody force themselves to be that devoted to a cause is recognizing that it's a national cause, and you're no longer, you're doing something greater than yourself.
Yeah. It's to add a little bit more to Jefferson as well. He's just like, now he's under attack, right? Like, or his memory's under attack. You know, I don't know if you've heard about the Jefferson Bible.
I've not heard about the Jefferson Bible.
It's actually really neat. This goes to show you how devoted this man was to learning and to helping other people see through the extra of
Hmm.
what really isn't that important. So what the Jefferson Bible was, is he went through like a fine-tooth comb. The Bible's already as big as it is, right? And as hard to read as it is. Even then, it wasn't as easy to read. Um, so because it's not using modern dialect,
Right.
you're reading from an older dialect that is not commonly practiced in any way, which conflicts with the mind as you're going through it, because thy being put in as many times as it was and things like that.
Begot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to stop for a second in the sentence and practice that into a conversation in a way that makes it mean something to you,
Hmm.
or you're just kind of citing over it. So he went through it with a fine-tooth comb and took out everything that he considered to be superstitious, everything he considered to be supernatural that was unable to be experienced or witnessed in the natural world. He was far more of a naturalist than most people believe, which is earlier skepticism, which really fascinating to me, because he was a devout man, but he was also devout in a way. He was more spiritual than he was necessarily religious overall. Because he was like, and not to say spiritual as crystals and that kind of thing. He believed in a higher power, but he also believed that there was a lot of minutia in the supernatural. So the Jefferson Bible is a smaller book.
Yeah, I would
After he
imagine.
went through and took out the verses that he felt was non-contributory to a better life and a life of worship in a way that really seemed to be more modern at that time for him. The Jefferson Bible is a really neat book. Um, so sorry, a little
That
bit of,
that no, that's fascinating, and I'm going to tell you, I was watching a History Channel documentary, and this had to have been 10, 12 years ago, but it was called Biblical Battles. And what I found fascinating about it is that it would take excerpts from the Bible that were describing a military action, say the Battle of Jericho, right? They marched around the city for 3 days, and then at the end of 3 days, they blew their horns, and miraculously, the wall fell down, right? Because they blew their horns. Well, when you look at it from the military historian perspective, what actually had happened is while they were marching around the city for 3 days, it was merely a distraction. They actually had snuck in a few of their assets, right? Let's call them assets. I don't know what it is, the people. And those guys had set to they had at the time it was they had the help of a prostitute in the city of Jericho. She snuck these guys in, and they burned down the main gate. It wasn't so much that the wall exploded, but these guys, these special agents, these secret agents, burned down the main gate. And the blowing of the horn was more of a signal to all the army marching around, hey, it's time, the gate's on fire. And so if you look at it from the biblical perspective, from what, hey, I'm reading the Bible and this guy blew a magical horn that broke the wall down. In reality, that wasn't the case. Another fascinating fact was when Moses was leading the Jews out of Israel or out of Egypt, they said that they were led by a pillar of smoke during the day and a column of flame at night. Well, I don't know. I guess I would picture, God putting his finger on the map and drawing and that his finger was smoke and fire, right? But the truth is that today we have what we call guidons, which is a flag that the guy in front of the platoon carries. I'm sure you've seen images of this, right?
yeah.
But the guidon is really nothing more than the evolution of what they used to have back in the day. Well, the military formations from back then would have been miles long and at some points only 2 columns wide based on the terrain they were going through. So how do you lead such a long, elongated group of people? You had what was called a guidon, but it had a pot at the top, and they burned coal in the pot. And during the day, they would close the door and it would be more smoke because the people in the rear could see the smoke from miles away. At night, obviously it's dark. They open the door to the pot, and now the guys can see the flame from miles away. And so you look at the way that the Bible's written, and then you actually equate that to the technology of the day. And what may appear so superstitious today was really just the poetic writing of what really was happening with simple technology.
Yeah. And it's not to forget, there was an economy of storytelling
Yes.
at that time. We still practice an economy of storytelling, but we practice it more for attention now and the possibility for ad dollars than really like making it a living purpose, right? Like other than possibly making some money off of it and entertaining somebody. But then it was something that they used a lot more for learning. They used it for not just entertainment. They also used it for purpose. So they had people that would go town to town telling stories.
That's a great point.
And
Yep.
and when they would have those things written down, it was like that the eloquence in which they wrote it made it more desirable to be adopted or put into the book. Because the Bible is multiple books made into one. So there was a lot of that going on. That doesn't diminish the value just because somebody added some, artistic opportunities to it. Doesn't mean that it's any less valuable. It just means that you may be mesmerized by it still as they intended then.
Well, but it does in a situation of the Jefferson Bible, because if that's removed, that's actual factual history that's being taken out.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that it's considered superstition. I mean, clearly we know Jonah was never eaten by a whale, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible that you spend days in the belly of a whale. But so how do you separate that if you don't have that knowledge base. And if you don't have those other, the only reason I know this is because I heard military historians talking about
Yeah.
it. Not because I would have known that. You know, if I were reading it and I were Jefferson, I would have been like, yeah, right. Column of smoke, you know, pillar of flame doesn't make sense. Let's get rid of it. It's all bulla bulla, right?
Yeah.
But it's actual history.
Yeah. And it's whether that was removed or not, he may have clarified on it. I'd actually need to go back and actually read the book.
Right.
Really.
But when you said that, it was a concern.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I absolutely appreciate that because it does create more of that critical analysis of it.
Yeah.
Because it is like, there's plenty of it that, again, I don't diminish it. As I'd mentioned, before, and I've mentioned many times in other videos, where I sit with my religious positions, like I appreciate other people having religious positions when it can offer something that gives uniformity, guidance, organization, structure, and the opportunities for strategy in somebody's life versus trying to figure out a way of creating a purpose by, whatever the modern fad is. There's benefit of having the stability of history, and modern fads can also be a lot like a tantrum, and if you worship a tantrum, it usually creates more chaos. It's like, could you imagine worshiping a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum?
Right.
It may make sense to the 3-year-old as they're doing it because they're acting out, they're not getting their way, but does it create, because we have people that can articulate their position, that if you take out what they're saying and look at the behavior, looks more like a tantrum. And the way they articulate it makes it make more sense to other people, and it's a replicator of that behavior overall, creating more of a problem. So those are some of the challenges of not having something of long-term stability. Why we reach for it, why the conservative mindset will reach for long-term stability, because they want predictability. And the open-minded thinkers are like, we need change, so we're going to do something to change, and therefore this is how we're going to do it. I'm not saying that, like really what's going on right now is a major tantrum overall. I'm saying that it doesn't have the long-term stability that we would call it historical. We have more of a, we're making change, which change requires an upset of historical behavior. The problem is that and for me personally, I feel a concern with it being too many changes or conflated changes into one that has next to no viewable, desirable outcome because it's too many agendas at one time that have unified. And that can create a predictable outcome as being fearful because it doesn't have one that's easy to see. But if you ask the persons that are involved with their particular agenda, that individual says, I know what it's going to look like. But they don't realize the people that they've allied with, some of those don't want to see the same ends, but they seem like it.
Well, the great point. The other side of that too, you make too many changes at one time. Which one was effective? Which ones aren't?
Yeah, measurable change, right? Like how can
Right.
you measure accuracy of effort?
Right.
You just see a lot of conflated agendas and you think, well, we were successful overall, but if I don't meet your agenda's needs, will you revolt against me as we're trying to stabilize later? There's so many different unpredictable elements about it that
Yep.
it's fearful. And a lot of people that like stability are concerned with it. I personally like stability, but I'm more driven for stability now that I've turned 40 and
Mhm.
now going 41. I like stability, but also from the business analysis, I look for stability. For me, I like to find something that's going to be between 70 and 80% stability, and then 20 to 30% change variance that I have more controllable elements about. And that gives you a predictable outcome that can outpace your competition if they're stuck on 100% of history, or
Mhm.
continuous behavior that doesn't really show much change or shows marginal change over time. It's stable, it's safe, it's a lot like stock market investing. If you want a stable long-term, you go with something that has a history of being stable. But if you want more potential reward, you have to take more risk. I try to mitigate my risk in a controllable area. 70% stability is my desirable, and then the maximum of 30% opportunity for change or test group. I still have 70% to stabilize my net, overall. So it gives me the opportunity. So I try to get away from that 90-10, which is what a lot of people go for, 95-5. So
it's interesting the fact that you're bringing this up with the topic that we've got, the Marine Corps has it's called the rule of 70%,
Ah,
and it's exactly in line with what you're talking about, but for a different reason. When they're talking, you're talking based on success for stability, right? You got 70% rate of success based on, you know, what your models that you've based on this change. The Marine Corps says don't plan past 70%. Don't put together a plan 100%, because first of all, it's going to take you 3 days to get 70% of a plan. It's going to take you 2 weeks to iron out that last 30%. And the fact is, once the first bullet flies, that last 30% doesn't make any sense anyways. It's already changed. So they say don't plan anything past 70% of a plan.
yeah.
So it's kind of in line with what you're saying. I know it's a little different in the nuance of it, but it's right in line with what you're saying. Like, there's no point in putting that extra effort in to plan that remaining 30%, because that part's going to change.
Yeah. And that's also part of, like, so if you look at what they're saying, you're leaving 30% for environmental influences for change.
Exactly.
And you need that 30%, because if you're 100%, you're marching the fields like the Civil War.
Yes.
Everybody's line set by set, and then everybody's playing this game where you're going to get hit. Almost
Yep.
certainly it's just a win. And that's where that adaptation of 30% is. Don't plan all the way up like that. And
Right.
the ability to retreat where they need to retreat. Even if it's a 5-step back fallback, it's still giving you the opportunity to reevaluate and redirect, but you're moving. So for me, I want to be able to move my 70% of stability into the 30% of experiment,
Mm-hmm.
because I have stabilizing elements to the thought process that helps it survive. Because if you give a 30% change, but you don't have 70% stability, the reality is you have 100% change, but the opportunity for it to survive is less. It's much like a human organism, or an organism in itself. It needs to have an environment that's going to be friendly enough for it to live. So if I have 70% stability, that 30% will be a projective experiment based off of what I know about 70% success, or the 70% ability to be successful. So
the way you approach that remaining 30% has yet to be seen until, right.
yeah,
So
but I
you
have a
don't know.
hypothesis that is
Yes.
grown out of the 70% of success rate that I'm familiar with. So it
Yeah.
gives me adaptability. I find that a lot of people and a lot of companies, individuals, and nations, they'll have different variances of that. Now, for me, would I want a 70-30 split for a nation? Probably not, because there's too many individuals that won't necessarily fully perceive it. And we don't want a brainwashed nation where everybody sits in front of the TV 7 o'clock at night, finding out exactly what our next move is. It would be great for unifying, but at the same time, it'll come at cost of autonomy. And
Yes.
being a free country, we don't like our autonomy being challenged. So how do we balance it out? Well, you have to figure out how to balance out. Maybe 70-30 is a good variable for the United States. I don't know personally, because that's not my area of education or expertise. Mine's more on the local, individual, and business level. That's the observable businesses that I've been involved with.
Right.
So I know that sounds like it might have come across like a little bit of a tangent, but exploring that 70-30% model, to me, has given great degrees of success. It's one of the things that have made me as successful as I have been, with the different levels and effectiveness in companies as well as individuals. Like when I take on a client, I'm looking for stabilizing 70% of their life and giving them room. But it also depends on their affect versus effect, their mental state versus the environment, and the effect, the way they react to their environment. I've looked for a lot of things to try to create a stabilizing element so that predictability creates calmness or reduction of anxiety, because you can predict something. Even if you're predicting a negative, it can still reduce the anxiety versus not knowing a darn thing about it, but fearing what might come out of it. Now, I don't know, it's all different. But if you at least know, hey, it's going to be negative, but I can tolerate the negative because I predict that toleration, or the level of what I should experience in the negative.
Well, the beautiful part about it is you have you can slide it back and forth. so you can take your 70% to guarantee nothing too detrimental is going to come. You can leave that 30% window and say, well, these couple of bad things might happen, but it won't be detrimental. It'll be something I can tolerate or plan or handle. So you can slide that 70% to where you need it to make sure that you're hoping for the best and planning for the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. If you went 50-50, by the way, just to add to this, is if you went 50-50, you may not see progress. If you went 60-40, you still may not notice enough progress to encourage you to continue. Because
Mm-hmm.
50-50 is like, hell if I know. It may be good, but tomorrow it may be bad. Life does give you that too, right?
Right.
But if I want somebody to make noticeable change, I have to encourage them change is occurring. So if it's 50-50, it's really hard to stabilize somebody for comfort and movement because they don't know how tomorrow's going to be. They want predictability. If it's 60-40, you will see noticeable change, but it's so minute by comparison that they may not feel like the effort's worth like the juice, right? The reward. But if you
Right.
move it to 70, it's enough for them to go, okay, well, I am seeing notable change. It's still going to take me time to get to my goal, but I can see that I'm getting traction. So that's why I
It's
like 70-30.
it's tolerable risk.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's 2/3.
Mhm.
Um, so it's tolerable risk.
Yeah.
Um,
We went off on like, this is a really interesting space in the conversation because we're talking about Jim's facts and then I hijack us again.
no, not at all. It's a rabbit hole. It's Alice in Wonderland, but not so much falling erratically as much as a skydive, just an enjoying the view and taking it all in.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, you want me to bring up another
Yeah,
fun?
please. We're going to
Uh,
have to finish up here shortly. So I want to get like, cause you've done research, you put effort into this. I
well,
enjoy our conversations, but I want to make sure that, one, we've got a 4th to celebrate, the 4th
yep,
of July. Let's make sure we're very clear about that. It's Independence Day. We need to celebrate it. Um,
yeah,
but at the same time though, like this is celebrating for me, but I've got
yeah,
other things I need to do as well. And also the viewers,
yep.
how long are they going to tolerate us?
So so we'll go through a couple of them. First, we celebrate the 4th of July because that's the day that everybody signed the Declaration of Independence, correct?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the only signer that signed on the 4th of July was John Hancock. Everybody else signed after. Didn't know that.
I didn't
Yeah,
either.
right? Head scratcher. Um, so when we established our independence from Great Britain, obviously we needed a flag, right? And that's where we see the original colonist flag, the 13 stripes and the 13 stars. The 13 stars were put in a circle as opposed to the right cover and alignment that we have now, the rows. That was done for the purpose of showing equality among the 13 colonies. That's why they
Mm,
put them in a circle, kind of like who's King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table,
yes.
right? At the
Huge.
time, we signed the Declaration of Independence, 1776. There was only 2.5 million Americans. That's huge when you consider the size of Great Britain, the history of Great Britain, the military force of Great Britain. This is 2.5 million colonists that said, you know what, force, strength be damned. You're not going to continue doing this to us.
Yeah.
And that's obviously inspiring from a patriotic sense as well. That these 2.5 million people, they dug their heels in. And when you look at it politically at the time, it wasn't even 2.5 million that were eager to battle the British. A lot of them, if you consider what was going on, they weren't. Everybody wasn't opposed to the ruling of Great Britain. A lot of people were saying, well, we need to just continue to work with Great Britain so that this is more manageable. So you had a very divided country at the time, and there was only 2.5 million residents. So of the 2.5 million, you're looking at maybe half, slightly more, 60-40, right?
Yeah.
um, But half of the people said, no, we don't need to go to war with Great Britain. That's suicide. What we need to do is make this more tolerable, get them to understand our position. And that's when the other half, our founding fathers, said, no, they're not going to understand. We need to show them by force that this is what we mean.
Mm.
I mean, that to me was pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's, and I do recall learning about obviously having the sympathizers or the individuals that didn't want to really create the separation, or they
yep.
didn't aid to the separation. They thought it was too risky. They were overly concerned. You think about it also, you have a history of warfare that Great Britain was well aware of and well practiced in. An advantage is they had to cross the ocean to get to us. So at least their troops were a bit uh, wore out from the trip when they first got here. And then the terrain difference and having to go into a terrain they weren't really familiar with, so they didn't necessarily understand exactly where they get all their resources other than being replenished and resupplied. But then there's also how our colonies were spread out,
Mm-hmm.
and was everyone able to be available and for those that would be there to fight. So it was a really fascinating thing to see how it all went down, and then to kind of really kind of use it almost like it's a disposable history.
Right.
That to me it's sad to think that it's a disposable history, because if we do that to this, then the history that we create now will be disposable to our future. It's like it's a cycle. It's to think that it wouldn't be as hubris.
It's tragic. One of the things that I find absolutely just phenomenal about being American, you look back at our history, we've always taken the scrappy underdog role, in terms of forging who we were. And that, granted, we're talking about 2.5 million versus Great Britain, in 1776. But even as you only have to go back to 1980 to see the miracle on ice. We were even then still just the scrappy underdog against the Russian hockey team, right, in the Olympics. And it's we succeed when we need to, and that's a beautiful thing. It's not so much the need to win as much as it's a refusal to fail. Does
Mm.
that make sense? And that really
Oh,
draws
absolutely.
me. That really draws me into the history and patriotism and all of that stuff, and why I wanted to be a part and join the military in the first place.
Yeah, and thank you for that, and to continue to help support the historical, the to carry on history there. I did get some numbers for you here also. The population of Great Britain in 1775.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, 'Cause I requested 1776, but 1775 is the one that showed up. So they had an estimated 8 million now, and they had 2,350,000 that were actually in the military at the time. So the military manpower, they actually had more people in the military manpower than we had citizens.
Wow.
So that doesn't tell you how incredibly hard it was.
To make that declaration.
Yeah.
Something else I didn't I don't know that I learned it and forgot it, or if I just didn't know it. But I didn't realize a big part of the Declaration of Independence was we realized that the numbers were against us. We recognized there was obviousness to it. We needed foreign aid,
Mm.
and we were able to get that from France. But what France needed from us was a commitment that if we're going to help you, you need to be your own entity. You need to be separate from Britain. And that was part of what the Declaration of Independence was. It was a demonstration to France that, hey, listen, whatever you need, give us. We got a lot of weapons and ammunition from France, and so the Declaration of Independence was a bridge to getting that.
Mm. Oh, it almost seems like it was an article. Well, I'd imagine also the reason why they wanted that, because France has been historically like, they've fought for democracy for a long time. Uh, just like Holland, really big into democracy. Uh, and actually, if you were to look at it, that's kind of, it almost seems like the capitalist versus socialist and communist like ideology war.
Yeah.
There's the colonist versus democracy war,
Hmm.
which is, I don't think people realize what it was like to live in England or Great Britain in the 1700s.
Right.
Or any like prior to that, throughout the the monarchy. It's you didn't have say so that mattered.
Right.
So a democracy gives you the value to have say so that matters. And that's what people don't understand also. Like there's like almost this idea that socialism is communism married to democracy, and it's not.
No,
It's
no, not
but
at all.
when you do talk to people about it, they talk about it in a context as if that's the case. And it's not. It's communism, socialism are very similar, but that's not. It doesn't have a democracy value. So
And, and that's when they reveal their depth of knowledge on that topic.
yes, yes, and it's one that I try. Like one, I always stand at the opportunity to be corrected. Because I
Yep.
absolutely like. I feel that if I don't stand in a position to be corrected, then I'm going to have fault in my future because I'm going to fail to learn a lesson. So I'm going to put it out there that obviously anybody can offer something to correct either one of us in this.
Yeah,
Uh,
please.
but but it is one of those things that you and I love to learn. So it's not like we're just gonna be like, okay, you throw something at us and we're just gonna be like, oh, we're wrong. Okay, cool. Like obviously be prepared to have a conversation, not a
Hmm.
debate, not an attack, a conversation, because we can have civil conversations even with disagreement. Um, so I say that because if we want to make mind changing effective, to where you open people's perspectives a bit, that's mind changing, right?
Hmm.
We want to make it effective, we also can't be confrontational. As the most effective means, 70% of your means should be flexibility with the stability of understanding. But the 30% can be, we can move in these areas, and I'm going to give you that much space in the conversation so that we can have a better, deeper understanding. But know that I'm going to come with it with a degree that I am attached to being right to a degree. No, it's not. I don't want to go around going, I'm not right about anything, because that sounds like I'm ready to just be whipped into submission. And I'm not a cuck. That's not my thing. So I'm not going that route. Mine's more of, I want to learn, but it's not going to be, Google's not going to teach me right out of the search engine, because that search engine optimization's off popularity, not always off of accuracy. Wikipedia
Right.
isn't always accurate either. The great thing about it is those, they put cited options in there, and I do like to follow those things. So, um, so with what we're talking about is we want to explore deeper, wonderful ideas, and when I say wonderful, I don't mean the feel good always. I mean, wonderful.
Yeah, as indifferent than what we know.
Exactly. Exploration.
Yep.
So that is fascinating to know that one, John Hancock was the only signer on the 4th,
Yep.
but that was still the beginning of the Declaration. So we know for a fact July 4th is Independence Day, is a declaration, because that was whenever somebody stood for us.
Hmm.
Now, the other is France insisted that we made a democracy
Yep.
and a separation from colonialism. So they supported us, but by way of having that declaration facilitated. And then the population values. Like, we barely had 2 million people in this country at the time.
Yep.
And that was their Navy service persons.
That was their military strength.
That was their military strength. And we're talking
Yep.
about men, women, children, all ages.
Right.
Plus, we didn't exactly have the most inviting and hospitable environment here,
Hmm.
because we were still in a foreign land. So we still had our, some of the fighting that was going on with the Native Americans as well at the time. So we had some allies and we had some enemies. So it
Yep.
wasn't like it was just us versus Great Britain. You know, we had a lot of stuff going on. So those are things that I think it's easy to dismiss because we get, almost like the quote value, where people want to use a quote just to support their narrative without
Right.
understanding the context the quote was pulled from.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Understanding the context of what we're celebrating, I agree. It makes it gives you a better appreciation, I feel.
Yeah. Details matter. Yeah. Do you have
So
any other facts over there? Because I want to make sure we honor the labor of your work over there.
no, no, absolutely, we're good. In closing, for my facts, today on average, we will consume 150 million hot dogs and over 700 million pounds of chicken. So
Wow.
that means that means the rest of our afternoon is going to be pretty full. We got a lot to do.
Yeah, literally pretty full. Well, Jim, you were an absolute pleasure. And
Absolutely, thank you.
this is what I mean by the free range conversations. We'll start with a specific topic, and it'll naturally go where it goes. There are other hosts that do very similar things. What I like about it is that we've intended to explore thoughts and just being able to be two guys just having this conversation. Guys just happen to be that the two of us are guys, but Chat with Chad's not designed for that. It's not designed to be specifically exclusive. It's designed to be open discourse, to talk about things, to honor where people are, and to really be able to explore where things can go. And that's the free range part of this. And that's what I really appreciate, that we do have a flowing conversation that, gives a lot of space for exploration. So thank you for that, Jim. So
Thank you.
yeah. Do you have anything else in closing other than some fantastic facts?
No, I truly appreciate you having me on. I enjoy it as well. I think we go back and forth really well, and I hope to be able to do it again. It's
Yeah,
been fun.
absolutely. Oh, there's so many subjects that we can do this with. And it's just a matter of just getting in the schedule and just getting it done. So, yeah, we'll plan out for some more. Okay.
Sounds real good. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, all right. So this is Jim, my special guest on talking about the 4th of July celebration, some of the reasons behind it, and also him being in the military and what that helped create for him, and how his life changed because of those variables or the influences that came out of it. Obviously, no enemy of anyone, really. Just a really good person that just openly shares about his life. So I appreciate that about you, Jim. And the ability to tolerate the ranges and the directions that I go in at times. So thank you for that. Now, this is Chad Everett Brochures. I am the host of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia, which is the company or the structure that made Chat with Chad possible. So tune in next time for more on this. Share this video with the people in your life that you know will benefit from it. And don't forget to show some appreciation for Jim and leave some comments in the comment section, whatever you're at, arguments, agreements, whatever it may be. We're always open to explore thoughts and ideas. So with that, thanks again, Jim. And
Thanks again, Chad.
you guys will tune in for the next one. All right. Enjoy
Take
the
care.
rest of your day. All right, Jim. Thank you, buddy.